What happens when you bring prison home with you? Well, nothing good, that's for sure. Let me explain. If you bring prison home with you, for instance, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say you're walking down the street at a strip mall, or you're in a mall, even better. And while you're walking in that mall or that grocery store, you get the point, and somebody accidentally bumps into you, and you still have prison mentality, and you look at them like, see, you gonna apologize? Why you bumped into me? You checking me? And they're gonna be looking at you like, what are you talking about? I'm sorry. You can be like, hold up, man, what you mean? You said you sorry like you ain't meant it. You bump into me in this Winn-Dixie, you know what I mean, this Walmart, and you ain't apologizing. I mean, boom, and you hit them, and then you back in jail because you just hit an elderly person because you so institutionalized, you thought they were checking you for your booty, and the reality was they too old and too arthritic to move out your way, and you just attacked the wrong person. You see, you don't want to be that person in society. Bringing prison home with you can be extremely dangerous. I'm going to tell you another story about a friend of mine, guy I grew up with. He did over a decade in prison straight. He did altogether, he probably did like 15 years. I don't know, something like that. And he got back out. We were working at the same company, and the company, we was on call. Well, the dispatchers who give us calls to tell us that we have to go on jobs, they can be a little snippy by the mouth, a little disrespectful. If I'm telling it by the truth, the dispatchers can be disrespectful people. They call you up and they don't have no consideration because the management's telling them get the job done at all costs. Well, they calling people who are firecracked, lit fuses, and they could blow up at any time, and they cursing these people out, telling them you better do this, you better do that, and talking bad about them. Well, they chose the wrong dude. And my man said, man, who you talking to? And he said, you know what? I'm coming to the office and I'm going to beat your ass. And after that, I'm going to pull your pants down and I'm going to pump you in your backside. He said he was going to hard R-word the dude after he knocked him out. He said, I'm going to treat you like I treat some punk in prison. And he said, I'm on my way. He was mad, hung up the phone. The dispatcher called the management. The management called another dude who I was friends with and he was friends with to call and try to calm him up, but nobody can get in touch with him. Man, the dispatcher locked all the doors. I think they had called security. You know what I mean? Everybody was on their way rushing to the office because they thought the dude was going to go up there, punch dude in his mouth, knock him out, and take his booty in the free world. You can't do that in society. I get it. People rub you the wrong way. I had moments in the free world where I responded the wrong way. My father told me one day when I got aggravated or mad behind something that he remembers me being in the front yard trying to calm down, and I was in the driveway at my parents' house because that's where I was living at when I first came home from prison. And he said I was pacing back and forth in like a 10-foot area and I wouldn't walk out that area. And he said he thought to himself, he said that must be because he came from prison. He was used to being in those confined spaces and you only had so much to walk. So he had automatically confined himself to walking in a 10-foot area, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You know what I mean? Instead, he was like, well, he can actually just go take a walk down the street to calm down and to release some energy and blow some steam off. But I hadn't grasped that. I was still institutionalized. And so I was walking in a 10-foot area when I could have just walk down the street and got my thoughts together. And they lived in the bayou. So I could have walked next to the water, skipped some stones on the water, and really got clarity of thought. Instead, I was still institutionalized. So institutionalization follows you for a period of time. And unless you learn how to get that stuff under control, you can find yourself in some bad predicaments. I know a dude, he called me one time. He literally called me on the phone. He was out from prison. He had done like 20 years. And we was incarcerated together. That's where I knew him from. He called up. I answered the phone. I'm like, what's happening? He's like, man, what's up, bro? I said, I ain't doing nothing. I think I was relaxed. He said, you chilling? I said, yeah, I'm chilling. He said, man, I'm glad I got you on the phone. I said, yeah, for real. I said, why? He said, man, you ain't gonna believe what I'm doing right now. I said, what you doing? He's like, say, bro, I'm taking a dump. I said, you taking a dump? He said, man, I know this sounds crazy. I'm telling you. He said, because I can't explain it just to anybody. He said, but I'm sitting here on this toilet in my house. I got one pant leg out my pant leg. And he said, I'm sitting on the toilet. He said, I can't poo. I said, you can't poo? He said, I'm institutionalized, man. He said, I ain't used to taking a poo in private. He said, I got to have somebody to talk to. He said, so if I can't call somebody and get them on the phone, or somebody's in the house that I can talk to, he said, I won't be able to go. He said, I get too nervous. He said, but now that I got you, he said, man, I'm good. He said, what's up? I said, you got to change your ways, man. You can't be living like that in society. You can't be institutionalized forever. I understand there's a transition period, but at some point or another, we can't live like that. When I first came home from prison, my first time, I remember being up in the kitchen and I wanted something to eat, and I made a hookup. I took some top ramen, some potato chips, crushed them up, mixed them together, swole that top ramen up, put some mayo, some mustard, you know what I mean? Mixed it all up, chop, 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 threw a can of tuna in there, chop, 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 cut me a can of Vienna, chop, 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 mixed it up, slammed it on some bread, and I was eating that. And my mom said, I thought you was cooking dinner. I said, I did cook dinner. It's right there. And she said, I ain't eating that. I said, what you mean you ain't eating that? I said, good stuff. I said, hook up. You know what I mean? I got tuna in it. She's like, son, I'm not eating that. I said, oh, man. So I called up my partner who I'd done time with. He said, what's happening? It's another dude I know I'd done time with. Call him the Slim. Slim, I said, say, Slim, what you doing? He said, say, hey, man, that's how he talk crazy. What's happening, bro? Say, bro. He was a chaotic dude. Hey, bro. I said, man, calm down, bro. I said, I just made a hookup. He said, what? I said, how far are you? He said, man, he said, I'll be at your house in about 30 minutes. I said, come on. He came over. Me and him was sitting in the backyard chewing on hookups like we was on the big yard or sitting in the dorm. You don't want to live like that your whole life. That's called institutionalization. You know the song by Suicidal Tendencies, institutionalized, man. You don't want to be institutionalized, man. You got to get yourself together. And dudes are living like that in society. Crazy like, off the rocker, off the rails. They can't get their thoughts together, you know? I can bring this video to you like this and talk about this stuff to y'all and share my experiences and share the experiences of others that I know who are institutionalized. But it took me some time. I remember having a conversation with a dude in Baton Rouge who knew a dude who I was locked up with, who got me a job in construction. And I was telling him, man, it don't feel good. I've only been home for about 4 or 5 months, directly after Hurricane Katrina. And he said, say, man, he said, you're going to build up a history in society. You just don't have one right now. And I couldn't understand that because most of my history had been in prison. And here I am 20 years later. And now I have a history of freedom. And so I don't act the same way I used to. See, I got time invested in society. And so my ways have changed. And so if you are home from prison and you think nothing's going right, well, give yourself a grace period. Give yourself time to adjust. And depending on how much time you've done in prison, depends on how much time you may need to adjust. And also depending on how you lived while you were in prison is going to depend on how much time you need to adjust. If you lived in prison like a savage, you know what I mean? You're probably going to need more time in society to get your mind right. You probably need to seek professional help because you're going to wind up reoffending and wind up back in prison and blaming everybody else but yourself. Now, if you was the type of person like me on my second prison sentence, when I was in prison, when I looked in the mirror and I took accountability and responsibility for my own actions, well, chances are you won't need as much time as the idiot and the fool who thinks that the world's doing him wrong. And he spent all his time in prison complaining, playing with punks, gambling, fighting, you know what I mean? Acting like an idiot, arguing with the officers every single day. He gonna need more time to readjust. Hopefully he can readjust. I heard a story of my aunt. She was working at a dealership with a dude. He was institutionalized, my cousin was saying. Man, everybody was scared to go back there. He worked in a tire shop. He was the real life tire shop black. And they'd go back there in the auto dealership and nobody wanted to go back there with him because he was threatening to violate everybody's booties in the free world. That's right. But the management said that the owner liked him because he never complained. And he worked harder than anybody else. He was a hard worker, but he was steady trying to take people's booties in society. You can't take your co-workers' booties. This ain't the cell block. You ain't in the open dorm. This ain't the penitentiary, man. You got to change your mindset. You can't take people's booties in society. You get a pink write-up slip. In prison, out here, you get a charge. You go back to prison for the rest of your life if you take somebody's manhood. This is some sick stuff, I know, but this is the reality of stories that I know, that I'm sharing with you. The absurdity of it all. It's crazy. But you don't want to live a life institutionalized. You know? Now, some of the individuals I'm thinking about, it took them some time, but now they're adjusted. And now that they're adjusted, they don't act like convicts no more. But some of them, you know what I mean? It's just, they can't get it out of them. It's just in there, you know? And no matter what, they don't want to fix it. Nobody can't tell me nothing. I don't care what you think. I don't listen to nobody. I do what I want. That's the type of attitude that's going to keep you as a pauper, a beggar, because you ain't nobody get no opportunity like that. I had to humble myself. How do you think I accomplished the things that I accomplished? And I don't barely talk about my accomplishments on this channel, and I'll share, you know, but I don't like to beat my own chest. But I accomplished a lot in 20 years. More than most people who never been to prison. My peers who never been to prison, my accomplishments in many instances far outweigh theirs. But I ain't here to brag on that. I'm here to say, you know what I mean, that we got to do our best after we get released. You know, treat people with dignity and kindness, man. Everybody ain't out here trying to take your booty, so don't act like it. Now they got some sick individuals out in society who should still be in prison. And then they got people in prison who should be let out. And they ain't never going to get out. Sometimes we get it wrong. Society messes it up sometimes. You know, but here we are on the Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube, where we talk about everything. Like dudes trying to take other dudes' booties in society. It sounds sick, demented, and twisted. It is. But this is true stories I'm telling you. Man, I know it's crazy. Give me a like and subscribe. Hit that hype button. Share this video. Let's get this community growing and bigger. Let's make the Pen and the Shank a big thing on YouTube. You know what I mean? Man, we don't want notoriety. We want responsibility. And that's what I'm doing. Showing up, making these videos. You know? That's all I got to say about that, man. I hope you liked the video. Thumbs up.